Hello, it's just me for this week's Fully Charged Plus podcast, but hopefully the stories I'm bringing you will be informative and entertaining. I mean, that's really the role of Fully Charged, isn't it? That's what we've got to do. But I want to start with batteries, because batteries are going to be such a critical part of everything that we're talking about. I'm not talking little batteries you put in your torch or your phone, or even mid-sized batteries you put in your car. No, these are massive batteries. But just before we really dive into that topic, here is a word from our wonderful sponsors, without whom this podcast would literally not exist. It would be vapor. So, a quick word from our sponsors. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future. Many thanks for that, and let's just dive straight in. So, many of us have heard about the huge Tesla battery at Hornsdale in South Australia. This is now capable of delivering 150 megawatts, or 189 megawatts of power to the Australian grid. Now, this has been upgraded recently. It's been there for quite some time. A little bit of background, it's so that we can understand the importance of this system. Obviously, I know a lot of you are very well informed about this development, but the Tesla battery at Hornsdale was originally installed in 2017, right next to a huge wind farm, right out in the middle of the bush, not near a town. It's a long way from any habitation, believe me, because I was desperate to go there when I was in Adelaide a couple of years ago, and it was just too far. I didn't have time. The Tesla I could have borrowed had the range. That wasn't the problem. I didn't have the time. Anyway, originally it had 150 megawatt hours of capacity, and that has now been increased to 189 megawatt hours. And this installation has been incredibly successful. It's been operating in the background, balancing the grid now for, what is it? I guess it's 4 years. And also making money in the process. Just to explain how this can happen. So you build a massive battery next to a huge wind farm. The grid is demanding energy from the wind farm. The wind farm's turning and producing energy. That energy goes into the grid, blah, blah, blah. And, that's interesting. Then another time, the wind is blowing. The wind energy is being generated by the wind farm, but nobody wants it. There's no demand for it. It's the middle of the night. And this wind farm was built in a very windy place. Obviously, that's where you're going to put it. So they're producing electricity that no one wants. Well, what we see happening with a lot of our offshore wind is they feather the blades stop turning, they stop producing electricity because we've got nowhere to put that electricity. The Hornsdale Tesla battery is somewhere to put 189 megawatt hours of electricity. That is quite a chunky amount. So that electricity, I don't know the intricacies of the financial arrangements. It's something I'd love to understand, but it's going to be very, very, very cheap. And you put that in your battery during the night, say, when electricity is either very cheap, possibly free, possibly they would even be paid to put that electricity. That was certainly what's happening in this country. There are numerous periods, actually it's more in the winter, I now understand, where electricity goes negative, the wholesale price goes negative. So you put that in your big battery, and then the next day, when electricity is really expensive, you sell it. What does that mean? Buy cheap, sell expensive. That means you make money. So that's a very brief explanation. And people in the UK that are on, for instance, a tariff that I'm on, the Octopus Agile tariff, are very aware of this, how expensive electricity can be, usually between about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 o'clock in the evening. Horrifyingly expensive if you're on a wholesale electricity tariff like I am. So you do anything you can not to use electricity from the grid at that time. And how do I manage to do that? by using the batteries that I've got installed in my house. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. I just want to say that there's an independent. I just want to really update a bit about batteries around the world. But an independent review found that the battery has saved South Australian consumers more than $150 million since it was connected in 2017. I mean, that is the thing that surprises people who were sceptical about it. One, how quickly it responds. So it will kick in and deliver power if there's a power cut in milliseconds, so that the grid operators don't even notice and they can't understand where the power is coming from that's keeping the lights on. And it's coming from those batteries. That's happened on more than one occasion in the last 4 or 5 years. Anyway, back in the old country, and I'm talking about the damp island I live on, there are some companies that have been busy installing batteries. In my old hometown of Oxford, they've just completed the installation of a 50 megawatt hour battery pack, so considerably smaller than the big one in South Australia, but still chunky, 50 megawatt hours, and not just the battery, but an electric vehicle charging hub right in the middle of Oxford. It's fantastic. It's not done yet. Can't wait to go and visit. They are calling this a hybrid battery because it's a huge lithium-ion battery system, which is the same as the Tesla one, but it's also an enormous vanadium flow battery. I never know. I'm going to worry I don't say vanadium right. Vanadium. I think it's vanadium. I'm sticking with that. A vanadium flow battery. Now, we have done some episodes in Australia about flow batteries. If you want to go and have a look at those, they're on the Fully Charged show. If you go on to Fully Charged and look for flow batteries, you will find it. Really interesting, different battery technology altogether. One of the things I understand and remember is, okay, a lithium-ion battery, you shouldn't ever completely empty it, and you shouldn't ever completely fill it. So the safe operating area is in the middle of its maximum capacity and flat minimum capacity. That's the safe way to make the battery last the longest. A vanadium flow battery is exactly the opposite. It's actually better if you drain it 100% so there's nothing left in it. And it's better if you charge it to 100% as often as you possibly can. That is the best way of using those batteries. So they really lend themselves to large grid storage. It would be completely useless in a car. Not suggesting that a flow battery would work in a car. So the whole reason they put this in, the Oxford Council and all the companies that are working on it, it increases grid resiliency. So they've got this huge backup in Oxford. If there is a power cut, they can cover it with that battery. Even if it's only for, usually power cuts in the UK are literally minutes, maybe 20, sometimes 20, 30, 40 minutes in length. They're not hours or days. It wouldn't be any good for that, but it would cover the whole of the city of Oxford for 25, 30 minutes without a problem. I'd heard a lot about this big battery system, and indeed the huge charging hub that's being constructed at the moment in South Oxford. So we'll definitely go and see that when it's finished. But the battery installed there, the capacity of that battery has already been overtaken. This is what we're seeing happening again and again all around the country. At a site just outside the lovely city of Chester, a company called Zenobē has started the installation of a 100 megawatt hour battery system. And this is being installed by French energy giant EDF, who of course are also involved in building the mind-numbingly expensive nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point C. But the less said about that now in this episode, the better. But why would a big energy company want to pay for a big, expensive battery system on the grid? The answer is simple. They will make money with it. And also, it will help them to maintain a constant supply of electricity to the surrounding area. That is the thing they'll be pitching. They'll be saying that. This is, it's ensuring grid stability. That's what it's that's what it does. But as a side note, it also makes money. And talking of batteries and electric car charging, smaller battery packs of between 5 and 10 megawatt hours are being installed all over the country as buffer systems between the grid and ultra high speed chargers for the rapidly growing electric vehicle market. Now, you will remember that we did an episode, some of you will remember, we did an episode about Gridserve, who have installed what they're calling electric forecourt. Very large, I think over 30 very rapid chargers in one location with covers over the chargers, solar panels, a cafe, toilets, shops, all that stuff. Very nice. Fast broadband, I can say that for sure. Amazing first step that they opened last year, and very popular. I went there the other day. loads of electric cars coming in, charging, going out again. It's extraordinary to see. It just happens. It's just like normal. People using it like it's normal. Very, very encouraging to see. Well, last week I presented an announcement from Gridserve at their charging facility, their electric forecourt, which is outside Braintree, a town in Essex, just northeast of London. And the charging company, they are Gridserve, the charging company that has bought and is now busily upgrading the old Ecotricity electric highway in the UK. Now, for those of you outside the UK, and I think this is relevant to where, it doesn't matter where you live, Ecotricity were the first company to install what was really a nationwide charging network. And we're talking 10 years ago. Around 85% of motorway services or highway rest stops had one or two rapid chargers. Now, I won't go into the slightly awkward history of their reliability. There's plenty of people around who experience the less than 100% perfect record that this network had. I'm one of them. But it was an amazing thing for Ecotricity to do, to lay this foundation. And millions of people would have seen those chargers, people just driving along motorways in diesel and petrol cars. They will have seen those chargers and the handful of early adopters like me using them, and some of them, a small number, would have thought, oh, maybe I'll try an electric car. Anyway, that is history, because now we're going forward. Gridserve, who's one really big electric forecourt we have featured on the show, have announced some significant upgrades. Apart from the new hardware they're installing, which is, I can say from experience, about 99.9% more reliable than the old chargers that Ecotricity had to use, they are also developing a really interesting new system for the occasional long-distance electric car journey. Now, I say occasional because most people don't drive 350 miles in a day, regardless of how many times I get told that on Twitter. Statistically, it's inaccurate. It's about 25 to 30 miles a day is the average car journey, not only in the UK, but in every European country and North America. In North America, that is the average. And yet you could drive 3,000 miles across the United States, which people have done and people do regularly, but not that often. Anyway, the next time you need to charge, this is the thing. This is so exciting when Toddington Harper, who is the founder, I'll be talking about him later on, who is the founder of Gridserve, when he told me this, by the end of the year, if you're signed up to the Gridserve system, which I think is you would have an app, which is what we're all used to at the moment, you plug into one of their chargers, do a bit of faffing with their app, and you've already put your bank card details in. Let's assume that. You charge your car and off you go. Now, that's it. So you're still doing that and you'll go there. Well, what's so special about that? I've had to plug the car in, use the app to pay for the electricity. Oh, faff. Well, the next time you need to charge, you plug into one of their chargers, and that is it. So this system is Gridserve are calling this system auto charge, and I genuinely think it's a real game changer. We'll be posting the session I recorded with Toddington very soon on Fully Charged Plus, but this does look to be the most obvious solution for charging a car when you're on a long trip. You do nothing. You literally drive up to the charge point, you get the cable, you plug it into your car, no apps, no membership cards, no tap to pay, no nothing. The system recognises your car. So the charger knows whose car it is. Any electric car, that's a really important point, any electric car. And you literally plug the car in and walk away. And you'll pay for the electricity, but that will be done automatically through the car, which is just brilliant. Now, okay, before we start to get into the Tesla-tastic 5 years ahead rant, which, yes, of course, I'm very willing to do, within the walled garden of Tesla, we've been able to do that for years, ever since the supercharging network was launched in 2012. You plug your Tesla in, you walk away. End of story. The car talks to the charger, the cost of the charge is shown clearly on the screen, the software works, the hardware works, the car charges incredibly fast, it all just works. That is normal in the world of Tesla. But it is not normal for the rest of the electric car universe, and it should be. So in the 7 years of driving and charging using the supercharger network all over Europe, Only one time, literally once, one charger didn't work and I had to move the car to another charger right next to the first one, and that did work. A massive hassle. I had to go forward, reverse back about 3 meters and plug the car into another charger. I was livid. I was furious that I had to do that once in 7 years. So yes, every electric car and every driver with an electric car needs to have access to a rapid charging network that is incredibly easy to use and that is incredibly reliable. Or, as the many pundits, know-alls, and mainly people who have never driven an electric car are always saying, the charging infrastructure is just not there for a 2030 transition to electric vehicles. Duh! No, because it's only 2021. Now, if the charging infrastructure freezes now, today, and not one new publicly available charging unit is installed anywhere in the country in the next 9 years, then yes, a transition to electric vehicles is fraught with proper nightmare anxiety. But the rollout of chargers is dizzying. By 2030, which is when, for those of you who don't know, which is when the current administration have said you will no longer be able to buy a new combustion engine car, not a new petrol or diesel or hybrid car you will be able to buy there. The lobbying that's taking place at the moment to ensure that you can still buy hybrid cars there will be mind-numbing in its frantic, furious, determined, angry intensity. But basically, by 2030, you won't be able to buy a pure petrol or diesel car in the United Kingdom. And by then, there's going to be such a range of cheaper, more reliable and much better electric cars. It's kind of irrelevant. It will have happened before then. But anyway, the rollout of chargers is dizzying now, and there's going to be hundreds of thousands of them, and they've got to be reasonably priced, easy to find, and all over the country. Yes, even in Norfolk, even in Wales, yes, even in the Yorkshire Dales, or the Lake District, yes, or just to the south of Maidstone in Kent, or yes, even near or in Leominster. Now, sorry, I'm just answering tweets that I've had in the past as this beauty from a few years ago, which I actually saved. I copied and saved this one because it was a really good example of some very weird psychology. Human beings are fascinating, aren't we? We really are. This was I didn't record the name of this person, but this is what they said. When are we going to get I can't help it, I'm going a bit nasal. When are we going to get a rapid charger in Leominster? Brilliant question. But definitely targeted at me, as if I was in some sort of control over where the chargers are installed. And I said at a clandestine meeting of electric vehicle elitists, make sure no chargers are installed in Leominster ever. Anyway, he went on to say, and you'll love this, he said, if there's an electric car with a 1,000-mile range that can charge in 3 minutes and there's a charger in Leominster, count me in. What a perfectly reasonable thing to say. So just so you know, Leominster is a small town in Herefordshire in the west of England. And I've just checked on Zap Map, which is a brilliant app that shows you where all the electric car chargers are. There are now 6 rapid chargers installed in the town of Leominster. But as that perfectly reasonable person stated, there still isn't an electric car with a 1,000-mile range without charging. So the poor fellows is just going to have to wait until we have a car with a fusion reactor in it, which will happen. And now, I don't want to point out that to drive 1,000 miles in the UK would take around 20 hours non-stop driving. So this gentleman clearly has a bladder the size of a barrage balloon, which I've got to a vague suspicion, though, even with the massive bladder, driving non-stop for 20 hours would be inadvisable from a health and safety point of view. And there's barely anywhere in the country that's 1,000 miles from anywhere else. So it's all a bit moot. You know, okay, in North America or Australia, fair enough. But we live on a small island just off the coast of Europe. If you drive 1,000 miles in any direction from Leominster, you're going to end up in the sea. Okay, moving on, although not that far, because I want to have a pop at some traditional automotive journalists who in many ways have set the tone for people like the tweeter I just quoted. Not all of them, But some of the older makes of automotive journalists. The classics, the curmudgeonly, grumpy old misery guts journalists that seem to be attracted to writing for the funny old world motoring magazines. Now, I met a lot of them when I started making Fully Charged many years ago. I was invited on endless jaunts around the world to test drive various new electric cars, and I would travel with these chaps, and yes, they mostly were chaps. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is very specific, and not all journalists are like this. Some of them are amazing. The people who write for Top Gear in the UK, like Jack Ricks, our very own Jack Scarlett. He is anything but a grumpy old curmudgeon. Johnny Smith. They all write brilliantly, and they have a very, very broad and clear understanding of the energy transition and electric vehicles. Some of them are slightly more questionable, and I'm not going to name names. I don't care. There's plenty of them. So this really is spread out over a large number of people. It's not specific to any one person. But consider this for a moment. These old dudes have been writing about cars since the mid-1980s, and they will have quoted horsepower, the design of the interior, the fit and finish of the vehicle, safety aspects, maybe even fuel efficiency, and a whole roster of commentaries about the look of the vehicle and what it might say about you if you drive one of these cars. They might discuss the new designs of the door handles, the car's haunches that house the sexy rear wheels with their expensive brake calipers picked out in red so you can see them and know that the brakes are really cool. They never mentioned where the fuel these ridiculous machines burn with happy abandon. No, they never talked about that. They talked about the horsepower, the grunt, the speed of the gearbox and the incredible efficiency of the twin clutch mechanism. This attitude to cars, this obsessive understanding of what made a car beautiful or ugly, sexy or naff, was of course very strongly influenced by three old automotive journalists who found fame and fortune on Top Gear, or now the Grand Tour. And they had the advantage of occasionally being funny and generally being entertaining and not taking themselves too seriously. But aside from all that, they never, nor did any automotive journalist, not once in the 80-plus years history of automotive journalism, never once did they refer to, ponder about or question where the materials that went into making the combustion cars they obsessed about came from. Not once. This is the new Enzo Ferrari, with its beautiful 6-litre V12 that rockets you to over 200 miles an hour. Now, how many times have we heard that? Let's face it, millions of times. Now let's try imagining a slightly alternative universe. This is the new Enzo Ferrari, and the iron ore that goes into making the engine castings is dug out of this quarry in Indonesia, shipped on this massive ship to this foundry in Belgium, where it's processed before being shipped to this steel casting foundry in Italy. How many times have we heard that? Never. Not once. Nothing about sourcing the materials in combustion cars was ever mentioned. But now, things have changed. Now these old codgers are clambering up on their knackered old high horses as fast as decades of free lunches, courtesy of various manufacturers, would allow. Where do the materials that make the batteries in electric cars come from? They ask knowingly. The problem is, they don't know much. Called me old-fashioned, but for me, a patronising and knowing question requires the person asking the question to know the answer. A good example was a recent article in a once reputable car magazine, now online obviously, where the author said that, for example, the majority, brackets 58%, of lithium comes from Chile. Now, the briefest Google search reveals the truth. The article states very clearly Australia is by far the world's top producer of lithium, with an output of 42,000 tonnes in 2019. It goes on. Chile sits second on the list. Or Chile, I think I should just say. I don't know why I'm saying Chile. Chile sits second on the list, accounting for 18,000 tonnes. That's quite a lot, but it's not as much as 42,000 tonnes. And so 18,000 tonnes of lithium production in 2019. Why is this important? Basically, it isn't. Both Australia and Chile extract numerous materials and minerals for a wide variety of industrial uses, and they have been doing so for years. But here's my point. Before electric cars made a significant impact on the world stage, no one in the long and glorious history of automotive journalism ever mentioned where materials used by manufacturers to produce cars had come from. Now, they suddenly become environmental guardians, eco-activists, questioning where all the materials come from. Well, forgive me for being a little bit sceptical with all your nice green, eco, tree-hugging electric cars, but the battery materials are literally dug out of the ground by children using their teeth. Which is not true. So forgive me for being a little bit jaded in my attitude towards journalists around my age who suddenly seem to care about the environment. They don't. They never have, and they haven't started now. They are literally doing the bidding of the big automotive manufacturers and the oil industry, which they have done since they put pen to paper or finger to keyboard. Now, I'm going to state the obvious and say, of course, it's incredibly important that we know, understand and hold to account the companies around the world who extract materials to make the products we need and rely on. It's always been in the background and most of us don't want to think about it, but now we need to. But in a balanced way with a grasp on context and the fact, and this is really important, the fact that the biggest extraction industry that the human race has ever created, the oil industry, is running rings around governments who are making tentative efforts to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Are the multi-billionaires none of us have heard of? We're not talking Bill Gates, Elon Musk, any of those, what's his name, the Amazon man, Steve Bezos, brilliant, I've remembered a name. All those multi-billionaires that get loads and loads of press. There's a few other multi-billionaires that get very little because they really work hard to make sure you haven't heard of them. The billionaires who control the fossil fuel industry, are they going to shrug and wander off to one of their many mansions? No, they are going to fight and fight dirty while keeping their distance. They're going to subtly encourage certain influential automotive journalists to spread ill-informed guff about a new technology they have near zero understanding of and therefore are easily duped. Where does the lithium come from? Lithium makes up 2% of the battery's mass, for one thing. Ask where the nickel comes from. I'm not going to get that angry about it. Okay, moving on. A quick assessment of the developments in the hydrogen economy. Oh, there are none. Hang on. No, that's not quite true. So, in next week's episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast, Michael Liebrich and I are going to be discussing hydrogen, among many other topics. Now, in case you're not aware of Michael, he is a very influential and highly intelligent man. He's the founder of He's the founder of New Energy Finance, which was an incredibly insightful journal into what was happening in the energy transition. That was bought by Bloomberg. It's now Bloomberg New Energy Finance. It's a fascinating. It will be a fascinating history of how the human race struggled to transition away from fossil fuels. Michael has an incredible grasp of the energy transition, and he has recently been particularly scathing about hydrogen, particularly in relation to ground transport. Now, I've always tried to sit on the fence in this particular debate. My thinking was along the lines of, I'm cycling along a street in London and a diesel bus overtakes me. I will then be breathing. I'm going to do this whole sentence again because I've got it so badly wrong. I've always tried to sit on the fence in this particular debate. My thinking was along the lines of, I'm cycling along a street in London and a diesel bus overtakes me. I will then be breathing in a noxious, carcinogenic soup of filth being pumped out of the back of this disgraceful old clunker. I just cannot believe that authorities are still in 2021 using diesel buses. Thankfully, the last time I was in London, which was last week for a few hours, I saw numerous 100% electric buses. Okay, they were all made in China, but at least they were on the road. They were so much better. Anyway, but then I've always said I would rather be following a hydrogen fuel cell bus. Nothing coming out of the back except a bit of water and cleaner air than went in the front. Now, the downside of this pleasant dream the people who are promoting this pleasant dream, who are lobbying and funding and pushing hydrogen as the be-all and end-all solution to all our energy needs, are who? Well, I'll tell you very simply, it's the fossil fuel industry. Why? Because currently, today, 95% of commercially available hydrogen, which, let's face it, is most of it, is produced by oil and gas companies in refineries. They steam natural gas and capture the hydrogen, but they are also releasing vast amounts of carbon in that process. So yes, the hydrogen fuel itself, very clean, but the process of producing it is extremely dirty. They will lie and cheat and do any kind of con job to try and say that's not the case. It is the case, and I know it's the case because someone who worked in an oil refinery and explained how it worked told me about it. So not a tree-hugging hippie. It was an engineer who works in oil refining. So just put your keyboards down for a moment. So their official line is they can aid the transition of combustion engines to fuel cells by supplying the fuel, which at the end of the day, which they're not going to advertise very much, is a fossil fuel derivative. Now, as for hydrogen as a replacement for natural gas in our gas network, for heating in our homes, from what I can gather and from talking to many people, if that's your idea, you are literally having a laugh. It's never going to happen. But I'm not going to say more. I'll wait for Michael to explain next week because he really knows his onions and his hydrogen. Now, some sad news or even bad news. I was really looking forward to seeing the new Nissan Aria in the metal. That is, of course, metal that's been sourced from a variety of places, including, I'm confident, a great deal of recycled materials and other materials. Sorry, just channeling old automotive journalists. Last year, Nissan said it planned to begin sales of the Aria in Japan from mid-2021, but the rollout of this model has been pushed to this winter, the firm's executive vice president Asako Hoshino told reporters. Now, the Aria is basically the second pure electric car that Nissan have ever made, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it because they have learnt an enormous amount from the over 500,000 Nissan Leafs that are on the road from around the world, including mine. And mine's got a new battery. I'll talk about that in a moment. The Aria is a new electric SUV, and it will be delayed because of the coronavirus pandemic and a global shortage of semiconductor chips. Now, this semiconductor chip shortage isn't just affecting Nissan. All electronics manufacturing has been affected, as I'm sure you're aware. A shortage in semiconductor chips, which are the brain found inside every kind of electronic device, from PCs and TVs to games, consoles and cars, has dogged economies now for over a year. Japan has experienced the biggest monthly drop in industrial output in a year, with an almost 6% fall in May compared with a month earlier, as manufacturing of cars and production machinery fell. Car production tumbled by 19% last month. This is around the world, all manufacturers, largely because of a lack of semiconductor chips. That's according to Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. However, it's important to remember that A, this doesn't just affect electric cars. Production lines all over the world producing combustion cars are also affected because all modern cars are jammed full of multiple semiconductor chips. And B, it's a temporary glitch, and we've had plenty of those over the past 18 months. So I know one day, maybe next year, we will see the Nissan Aria, and if I'm nice, maybe Jack Scarlett will let me have a go in it. Just for a bit, just round the block. Now, while on the subject of Nissan, my trusty old Nissan Leaf, as I mentioned, is currently languishing in a lovely warehouse in the Netherlands. Not exactly handy for me. It's been fitted with a new second-hand, but incredibly healthy second-hand 40 kilowatt-hour battery pack, and I can't wait to drive it home. The range of that car has almost tripled from what I can judge, and I'm really excited to try it. And tripling a car's range, if it had like a 150-mile range when it started, would be amazing. I'm tripling a car that had a range of around 60 miles. 360, 18. No, it won't be quite tripling it, a bit less than that, but say 160-mile range in my lovely old Nissan Leaf. Now, I'm chomping at the bit to be allowed to either go to the Netherlands to pick it up or to meet the lovely folks from New Electric New Electric Netherlands, who did the battery swap to arrive on this sun-kissed island, because that was one of the plans. I'd meet them off the ferry in Folkestone or somewhere. Was it Folkestone? Anyway, wherever it is. And then I'd drive it back home and we'd film that. Or I'll go to the Netherlands and pick it up and we'll drive that, and my wife will drive the Tesla back. And, we've tried all sorts of things. We're just not allowed to do it at the moment. So eventually, only 2 years later than planned, we can make an episode about what it's like to have a new battery fitted into one of the earliest purpose-built electric cars. And, we all know, anyone who knows a lot about electric cars knows that there were lots of issues with the early versions of the Nissan Leaf as regards range and battery life. And I made every possible rookie mistake with our batteries. Here's an example. Drive 4 miles to the shops, get some milk, drive 4 miles back, plug the car in, start charging again. No! We did that thousands of times. And so we really didn't help the batteries. Okay, last story. So I started with batteries, and I think I'll wind this episode up with batteries, but these are really out there. These are science fiction stuff, and I say that because I described this very technological notion in one of my own science fiction books, titled News from the Squares, published by Unbound, and not available in any bookshop because I think it's out of print. I don't know if there might be Kindle versions. I think there are Kindle versions on the old Amazon. Anyway, cop a load of this. Researchers from Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden have developed a concept for a rechargeable cement-based battery. One day, the technology could turn an entire building into a massive energy storage device akin to a giant battery that we know now. The technology has some interesting possibilities, as cement is one of the most commonly used building materials in the world. You don't say. The concept involves a cement-based mixture with small amounts of short carbon fibres added to increase the conductivity and flexural toughness. Oh, I've got a very good mate called Christoph, who is an accountant. He's an architect. He's not an accountant. He's an architect that has mentioned the concept of flexural toughness of building materials. Anyway, you may also just now be able to hear a torrential downpour on the roof of my studio, which is very refreshing because it's been quite muggy recently. Also embedded inside this cement mixture is a metal-coated carbon fibre mesh with iron for the anode and nickel for the cathode. Other researchers investigated concrete batteries in the past, but they've had very, very low performance. They've just not really been worth it, but this seems to be a bit different. The researchers at Chalmers had to come up with a new way to produce the electrode. The cement-based battery now has an average density of 7 watt-hours per square metre, which is about 10 times better than previous concrete batteries could produce. So I'm not going to lie, with my limited knowledge of battery density, that is not very energy dense. But when you calculate how many cubic meters of concrete are used in an office block, say, or a multi-story car park, or a hospital, or a residential building, you are talking seriously viable energy storage, possibly megawatts per building. And that will make a massive difference. If your actual building can store electricity safely and securely in the concrete that it's built of, that's quite a big change in the world. So proper early days for this particular technology, but it's fascinating that weird new ideas like this are emerging all the time. And that's really what keeps, I think, this show interesting. I think that's what keeps all of us that work on Fully Charged really focused and determined to keep making the series. And we're enjoying doing it, even though it's a bit of a slog at times. Now, that's all for this one. There's going to be some fantastic episodes coming up on the Fully Charged show regular channel on YouTube, and on the Fully Charged Plus channel, which this podcast also will be housed upon, with a very boring video, which is just me sitting here reading my news out. But that's all. That's it. The door is creaking now because there's a bit of a breeze. I should have shut it, but it's a bit muggy. I won't go on anymore. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Tell your friends about it. You can subscribe it on, you know what I mean, using your podcast downloading app, whichever one you like. It's very easy to subscribe to this feed, and also on Fully Charged Plus. Subscribe to that. Have a quick butchers at the old Patreon link, in case you're interested in that. I'm not. There's no pressure at all. That's it. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening and indeed possibly watching.